Chapter 11, mixed economy. We're talking about mixed economy. Basically, we're talking about a combined economy. That means we have both the private sector and the public sector. That's why we call it mixed economy. So that means there's the combination of the planned economy and the market system. So the market system, which is the private sector, and the planned system, which is the public sector, combined together. That is mixed economy. So scroll down. The public and the private sector. An economy is a system that attempts to solve the basic economic problem. Decision makers in an economy have to decide what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. In any economy, goods and services may be provided by the public sector or the private sector. In any economy. So we're not talking about the mixed economy now. For the mixed economy, it is both the private sector and the public sector that provides goods and services. That means allocation of resources is done by both the private sector and the public sector. That is why we call it a mixed economy. But what they are trying to tell us here is that for each economy, an economy is a system that is trying to solve the problem, right? Of what to produce, how to produce, for whom to produce to. So this problem will be solved by, in any economy, this problem will be solved. But maybe be it a planned one, be it a market one, any economy would have to use either the private sector or the public sector. Do you get the point there? So the private sector is the individuals, the private firms. The public sector is the government. I think it's clear. So go down. The private sector, organizations and ownership. Goods and services in this sector are provided by businesses that are owned and controlled by individuals or groups of individuals. In many countries, most consumer goods such as groceries and consumer durables like those shown when we started, are provided by the private sector. So for the private sector, they provide goods and services that are consumables, like things that we have to buy. They make sure they produce it. We call them the durables. Like anything we have to eat, we have to purchase, clothes, these things are provided by the private sector because it has to be sold and they sell it to be able to make profit. I think the private sector is clear. So examples of the private sector are the sole trader. When we talk about the sole trader, we're talking about an individual, a business that is owned and controlled by an individual. That's the sole trader. Clear? Yes. We have the partnership, which is 2 to 20 people coming together with the aim of making profit. That's a partnership. Then we have companies, which is owned by shareholders. I think it's clear. So any of these three, they are all in the private sector. The sole trader, which is a business controlled by individual, owned and controlled by individual, the partnership and companies, they are all in the private sector. And what they do is to provide goods and services. What are the aims of the private sector? Is that one, it's survival. So one of the aims of the private sector is to survive. And when we talk about survival, it means continuing to be in the business. Are you getting this? So when the firm is first set up, many owners will not expect to make a profit immediately. It takes time to establish a business, and new business owners often encounter unexpected difficulties. As a result, the initial aim of a firm might be simply to survive. Survival is also important when trading the conditions are difficult. So for a new business that is setting up, you think about survival. That means gaining the trust of the business, gaining the trust of customers, getting over the stormy period to normalize and being able to understand how the market works. This is what survival is. And not only for new businesses, even existing businesses, they might also need to survive, especially when the condition is difficult, like trading conditions are difficult, like maybe there's recession, things are not moving well. So there's decline. The economy is in decline. At that point in time, businesses or firms will not be thinking about making profit. Rather, they will be thinking about survival. Do you understand what survival is? So survival is an aim of any business, especially existing one, because they are just starting up, or new one because they are just starting up, or existing one when there's trading difficulties like recession. Is it clear? Another aim of any business, private sector, is profit maximization. They want to make as much profit as possible within the organization, within the market. When we talk about profit maximization, there's always the market equilibrium. So making the profit ahead of the market equilibrium is profit maximization. So that means if firms are able to increase their price, if they are able to do it, they will do it. Why would they want to do it? They want to do it because they will be able to maximize revenue and maximize profit. That's also another aim. The other aim is growth. When we talk about growth, we're talking about expansion. So So a business might also aim at expanding its business, like having 2 branches, having more branches, even going abroad to expand. That is what growth is about. Is it clear? Yes. And the last one there is social responsibility. When we talk about social responsibility, we're talking about taking care of the well-being, environment, being socially responsible, not polluting the air, taking care of the environment, thinking about the stakeholders, not only the shareholders. This is what we call social responsibility. Do you get it? Yes. A firm is socially responsible if it thinks more of the stakeholders, not the shareholders. So when you think about the stakeholders, that means the shareholders are part of the stakeholders. But when you start thinking only about the shareholders, you are not socially responsible. You don't think about government, you don't think about the environment, you don't think about the community, you don't think about the customers, you don't think about your employees, you don't think about the suppliers, you only think about your shareholders, the owners of the business. That is not socially responsible. If you are socially responsible, you have to take care of everybody. You have to think about everything. Is it clear? That is the private sector. Any question about the private sector? Good. We go to the public sector. For the public sector, ownership and control. Public sector organizations are owned and controlled by local or central government. Some of the main examples are outlined below. So, for the public sector, it is controlled by the government of the country. And if it is only the government of the country that controls the whole sector or the whole economy, it is a planned economy. But here we're just talking about the public sector, which is part of a mixed economy. Do you get what I'm saying here? We are discussing mixed economy. Part of the mixed economy is combined with the private and the public. We've talked about the private sector. So the other part is the public sector, which one will discuss the ownership and control. But for the public sector, it is controlled by the government. I think it's clear there. So, for example, is the central government department. We said, such as in the UK. Well, let me just explain what central government department is. For the central government, we're talking about the head of the government, their department, the head of the whole government. They have each department, like the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Interior, the Ministry of Transportation. That is the central. They report to the president or to the prime minister. Clear. We have the public corporation or state-owned enterprise. Here, we're talking about the ones that are owned by Tripoli. Oh, Tripoli Hospital. Oh, Tripoli this. That is state-owned. It is part of the government, but the government of the state, not the central government. Some are owned by, like, Tripoli University or the University of Libya. If there's the University of Libya, that is owned by the government. Tripoli University is owned by the state government of Tripoli. Is it clear? We have local authorities like Janzu, like Siraj, like the municipality. Is it clear? And other public sector like the postal services, the Libyan post services, the Libyan maritime, the Libya electric company. These are other sectors too. So what are the aims of the public sector? For public sector, one of their aims is to improve the quality of services. That means services are what they do. That is what government do. They ensure that people get better. Healthcare, police service, water services, electricity. Government wants to make sure that all these services that they render are improved, like they do it in a better way, in an efficient way. That is their aim, number one. Two, minimizing cost. Government resources are scarce, and it is important that waste is minimized. In the past, public sector organizations have been criticized for being inefficient. As a result, the government is regularly looking for ways to cut costs in all areas. The economy, the problem of the economy is scarcity. So these resources are not always enough. That's why government would make sure that it does not waste the resources. By not wasting resources is to cut costs. This is what government of the country will do. Do you understand? They want to make sure that things are not wasted. They use the right thing they use the right amount of resources to produce the right resources, the right product. They don't want to waste this. That is the second point there. Allow for social costs and benefits. So there's what we call cost benefits. So government will make sure that everybody, not only certain people, enjoy the benefit of what they produce or the services they render. The services they render is for everybody. And before they render that service, they check if it is more beneficial than the cost. If the cost is more than the benefit, government will not do it. Government will only take the action if the benefit is more than the cost. That is allow for social cost and benefit. Is it clear? Profit. Some government enterprises, they also make profit. Like they make example of the Emirates airline, the UAE. The airline is for the government, but it's making profit. So some government enterprises are also aiming to make profit. Is it clear? Any question about that? So go to types of economy. Types of economy. Different economies have different approaches to providing goods and services. The type of economy used to choose, produce, and distribute goods varies according to the role played by the public sector. There are three types of economy. We have historically, a country type of economy was shaped by its political ideology. Capitalist countries adopting a market economy and communist countries in a command economy. So we have a market, a market of free enterprise. When we talk about a market, resources allocation is done by the individuals or group of individuals. So let's read. A market of free enterprise economy relies least on the public sector for the provision of goods and services. The vast majority are provided by private businesses. Market forces, that is, supply and demand, determine the allocation of resources. The role of the public sector is limited to providing a legal system, a monetary system, key state services like defense and policing, and ensuring that competition exists between businesses. The most economically free countries in the world are often considered to be Singapore, Australia, and the USA. For the market economy of free enterprise, here there's no government intervention. Resources allocation is done by the people, the firms, the private sector. So there's no government intervention. So it is about the demand for and the supply of goods and services. That's what we call the price mechanism. So prices are determined by the demand for goods and the supply of the goods. That is the free market. Is it clear? We have the command. For the command of planned economy, this relies entirely on the public sector to choose, produce, and distribute goods. All resources in planned economies belong to the government, and the state is responsible for planning, organizing, and coordinating the whole production process. Goods are distributed from state-owned shops where they are sold to consumers at price set by the state. There are few, if any, examples of planned economies in the world today. Cuba, Myanmar, and North Korea are the closest example. So, for a command economy or a planned system, resource allocation is done by the government, the public sector. They are the one that decide price and they decide allocation of resources. I think it's clear. They'll go to the mixed economy. For mixed economy, we're talking about the combination of the private and the public sector. Is it clear? Any question about that? So we'll move on. A mixed economy. In reality, no economy is entirely planned or free market. Most countries in the world have a mixed economy, and the decisions what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce are made by both consumers and the state. So allocation of resources in a mixed economy, like I said earlier, in a mixed economy, allocation of resources is done by both the public sector and the private sector. I think it's clear. So go to what to produce in a mixed economy. A mixed economy recognizes that some goods, such as consumer goods, are best provided by the private sector. Goods such as food, clothes, leisure, and entertainment, and household services are best chosen by consumers. The market system ensures that the businesses produce the consumer goods that people want. Other goods such as education, street lighting, roads, and protection are more likely to be provided by the state. The public sector tends to provide goods that the private sector might fail to provide in sufficient quantities. This is often caused by market failure. So, why do we even have the mixed economy? We have the mixed economy because it solves the market failure. There's always a market failure. Market failure occurs when there is inefficiency in the market forces for demand and supply. Goods that are provided or produced, goods that are produced are not always enough. Or the failure to produce goods that we demand for, it's a market failure. So if there is market failure, the only way out is to provide the goods that are missing. You get it? So this can be done by the government. That's why government will intervene. So whenever there's market failure, there's always government intervention. So government intervention will bring about the mixed economy. So the private sector will produce. And whenever the private sector is unable to produce, the public sector will produce to cover up for the inefficiency of the private sector. So that's why mostly we have the mixed economy due to government intervention. So the private sector will produce goods and provide services. But whenever they cannot produce it or provide the service, the public sector would come into it to provide it. That is government intervention. I think it's clear. Yes. So what to produce is the type of goods that we have to produce. So these type of goods are produced by both the government and the private sector. Clear. How to produce? The process to, we want to produce phones, or we want to produce bottled water. How are we going to produce this? The process to which we have to produce this thing will be decided by both the government and the private sector. Is it clear? For whom to produce? Who are those that have to benefit from what we are producing? Both the private sector and the public sector will decide that. Is it clear? Is it clear, please? Yes. Finally, different governments around the world will decide on the degree of mixing in this type of economy. Some countries like France allow the government to play a greater role in the economy. For example, government expenditure in France. So basically what they are saying is that in every country, the extent at which government will be involved, the extent at which the private sector will be involved will be decided by each country. Some countries, they have more involvement of the private sector than more involvement of the public sector. In some countries, the public sector involved more than the private sector. But whichever way, they are both still in the mixed economy. Is it clear? Any question about that? So we'll go to market failure and the need for government intervention. Although markets may have a reputation for using resources efficiently, because of market failure, resources are sometimes wasted. Market failure is where market leads to inefficiency. It can occur for a number of reasons. So when I talk about market failure, it's because there's inefficiency in the production of goods and services or in allocation of resources. So whenever there's inefficiency in the allocation of resources, it is called market failure. I think it's clear. So what are the reasons why we have market failure? Number one, externalities. When we talk about externalities, we're talking about external cost, which is the cost to the third party as a result of the action or inaction of the private sector, or as a result of the action or inaction of firms, action or inaction of individuals, action or inaction of government. So whenever the firm, they made an action and the third party has to pay for it, that is external cost. It is market failure. Is it clear? Lack of competition. So a market may fail if there's no competition and it becomes dominated by one or a small number of firms. When this happens, the dominant firm may exploit consumers by charging higher prices and limiting choices. You get it? So another market failure is as a result of dominance of a firm, higher prices, lack of no choice. So if consumers do not have choice, if consumers have to pay higher prices for goods that are produced, it's a market failure. So if goods are not affordable for consumers, it's a market failure. Is it clear? Missing markets. Some goods and services called public goods are not provided by the private sector. Examples include national defense, policing, street lighting, and the rest. So there are some goods, we call them merit goods. These goods, they are goods that without government producing them, we cannot all have them. Example is education. Just imagine if there's no education. If there's no government schools, that means not everybody will go to school. Yes or no? So we call them merit goods. Education, healthcare. Without government providing them, we cannot all have them. So they are part of the missing economy. They are part of the missing economy. So these things like street lights, like police, like prison, without government providing them, the private sector will not provide them, because the private sector will not be able to make profit from them. So the private sector would not. So the missing markets that we're talking about here, if government does not intervene, there will be market failure. So the market failure is the missing market, but with government intervention, it solves the problem of the market failure. Is it clear? Lack of information. Information is important. So without information, people might overconsume or underconsume goods. So people, when they lack, we call it asymmetric information. When one part has more information than another, we have to deal with each other. But you have more information than I have. That is asymmetric information. It might lead to market failure. So government should ensure that people have access to information. So lack of access to information is a market failure. Is it clear? Factor immobility. When labor, land are unable, or when labor and capital are unable to be mobile, we cannot use them quickly. They cannot be used for other things. It's a market failure. Do you get it? Factor immobility is a market failure because you cannot change, you cannot use workers to do other things. You cannot use capital to do other things. That is factor immobility. Whenever there is factor immobility, it brings about market failure. Is it clear? Any questions about that? So go down. Role of the private and the public sector in the production of goods and services. Are you there? Yes. In most countries, the private sector is responsible for providing the everyday goods and services bought by people. This would include food, clothes, consumer durables such as electrical goods and cars, personal and household services, financial services, entertainment, and holidays. It also includes raw materials, components, machinery, and commercial services like banks, insurance, and the rest. So all these things have to be provided by the private sector, not the public sector. The public sector cannot provide things we need every day because they have to work on budgets. Do you understand? So government does not provide things that we buy every day. They can't. They only provide things that will last for a long period of time. Are you with me? However, the public sector tends to provide public goods, public services. In particular, it focuses on the provision of public and merit goods. Merit goods are, like I told you earlier, are goods that without government providing them or producing them, we cannot all have them, like education and healthcare. So government provides what we call the public goods. And what are public goods? These are goods that are non-excludable and non-rivalry. They are non-excludable because once they provide them, nobody can prevent anybody from taking them. That is why we call them public goods. They are non-excludable. You can't stop it from consuming it. I can't stop it from consuming it. That is non-excludable. And non-rivalry, it means your consumption doesn't reduce my consumption, like the street light. When you pass through the street light, you will still see the same way I see. So we call it non-rivalry because you consuming it does not reduce my consumption. We call it non-excludable because whenever it is being provided or produced, no one can stop anyone from consuming it. Do you understand the difference between non-excludable and non-rivalry? Non-excludable means you cannot stop someone from consuming it. Non-rivalry means your consumption does not reduce my consumption. Is it clear? Move down. The public sector and the private sector in different economies. So, like we said earlier, every country has their own way of using the private sector and the public sector. Some countries, they use more of public sector than private sector. Some countries, they use more of private sector than public sector. That is the point they are making here. Is it clear? They said the balance between public sector activity and private sector activity will vary in different countries. In some countries, government play a key role in the provision of key public services such as education, healthcare, security service, and infrastructure. However, at the same time, they also own significant stakes in large commercial organizations such as banks, airlines, water companies, energy provision, and transport. Some examples of countries where the public sector plays a dominant role are China, Hungary, Russia, Sweden, and UAE. In these countries, the government takes dominant role. That means the government provides most of what is needed, but they are not a planned economy. They are still a mixed economy. Is it clear? Any questions about it? Finally, in recent years, many economies have become more market-oriented. In many countries, the number of public corporations has been reduced. For example, in some countries, industries such as water provision, electricity electricity generation and distribution and telecommunication have been transferred to the private sector. Many Eastern European countries have also transferred a lot of government-run businesses into the private sector following the breakup of the Soviet Union. The process of transferring public sector resources to the private sector is called privatization. So what they are saying is that in recent years, now, like recently, these days, economies are more of the private sector. Even the public sector are converting to the private sector. So the buying of the public sector by the individuals or private firms is called privatization. So that's where privatization comes in. So privatization means state-owned businesses, state-owned property, state-owned assets are being transferred to the hands of the private sector. Is it clear? Any question about it? We'll go to the multiple choice question. Number 1. Which of the following goods or services is most likely to be provided by the public sector in a mixed economy? In a mixed economy. A, motorways, yes. That's the road, you know. B, question 2. Which of the following is an aim of a public sector organization? The public sector, the aim of a public sector organization. Providing the public service. So that ends chapter 11, mixed economy. Thank you.